tease some of them out with our friend there at Semafor who covers Capitol Hill, reporter Eleanor Mueller. She joins me. Eleanor, good to see you here. So let's walk back. I know this was really going on in the House last Congress. Didn't really get anywhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, he was really kind of first ambivalent about this and then outright opposed to this making its way in the House. Now, this time, this Congress, it's making its way there in the Senate. Who's for it and who's against it, and why?
I think that depends on what it looks like. So the reason that we saw all of the Republicans on that Senate committee earlier this week vote against advancing Hawley's version of the bill was because it did expand what was going to be a ban on, buying, selling, and divesting stocks, or encouraging lawmakers to divest stocks, was expanded to include not just Congress, but also the president and the vice president. And Hawley's point is that Trump and Vance would not be required to divest because that requirement would not kick in until 2029. They would still be affected by the buying and selling provisions of the bill. And so I think the question for a lot of Republicans was then, what are we doing? We have no interest in reining in Trump or Vance or their abilities here. And so we would much rather vote against this thing that includes, Senator Bernie Moreno, who was a co-sponsor of the bill. He told me yesterday he plans to get reengaged. I spoke with him today. He said that he's already approaching committee Democrats in hopes of maybe striking some kind of deal that they are amenable to that excludes the president and keeps this just solely related to members of Congress. Whether or not Democrats go for that, I think remains to be seen.
So, Eleanor, let's talk about the rationale for this. It seems like this is bipartisan in nature, that the support is there amongst Republican and Democrats. But why? What is the problem these lawmakers are trying to solve here? What are they alleging, their fellow members are doing with, making trades on the market, having their investment analysts make trades on their behalf, to kind of beef up their portfolio here. Is this piece of legislation a solution in search of a problem or no?
It's a fantastic question, and we've seen, honestly, not a ton of across-the-board research backing up that, in fact, lawmakers are consistently making more on their stocks than the public because of potentially having access to insider information, whether that relates to bills that are going to be passed or something that they're briefed on that the public's not aware of. Obviously, there are certain outliers that get attention. Democrats have been coming for Congressman Rob Bresnahan pretty hard because he's made some trades that have seemed potentially related to some things that have come up in the House. But as far as a across the board trend here, there's not a ton of evidence, at least at this point, to suggest that these lawmakers are consistently outperforming the market. And so I think that's the point of supporters like Josh Hawley is, let's just put this out of sight, out of mind, pass this bill and take away people's ability to even question whether or not you are acting in your constituents' best interest or in your own personal best interests.
Yeah, so if this bill, it's called the Honest Act, the Senate version would build on the House version. If it were to become law, it would immediately prohibit elected officials, including the president, from buying stocks. It would ban them from selling stocks for 90 days after enactment. It also requires the elected officials to divest from all covered investments, but not until the beginning of their next term in office. So this would shield the term-limited president from that requirement here. Let's just say, Eleanor, some of these members of Congress, they're flat out accusing, their colleagues in both the House and the Senate, some of whom have been caught. They're accusing them of insider trading, having this information available to them before the American public and profiting off it. Isn't that the accusation down at its root?
100%. The bill, Hawley's bill, is called the Pelosi Act, I think, because he's arguing that Nancy Pelosi and her husband are guilty of doing that. We saw, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent earlier today on CNBC level a similar accusation against Senator Ron Wyden and say, the phrasing he used was he's a statistical aberration. If he were a private citizen, Bessent said the SEC would be knocking on his door, basically, by saying that, alleging that Wyden is trading on insider information. And I think the big question here is whether or not Democrats, now that they have advanced this version of the bill, that would apply to the White House as well as Congress are going to help support an altered version that now exempts Trump, right? Democrats don't have a ton of power here. They're in the minority in the House and the Senate. They don't have the White House. And so they're looking for really any opportunity they can get to hold the administration accountable. And if they've been able to think this week that this was one way they could potentially do that. And I don't know that they'll necessarily take kindly to that being taken away. Senator Elizabeth Warren told me just, a couple hours ago she wouldn't rule out voting for a stock ban that only affected Congress, not the White House. But she was pretty clear that she hoped that that would not happen and that she feels like there's real nationwide momentum here for something that would apply to all federally elected officials.
I mean, yeah, you cover Capitol Hill. It's not every day you have lawmakers, debating something that's not in their own, personal economic interest. So they're kind of, debating a self-regulatory check on themselves. That's somewhat refreshing, I would argue, but the White House doesn't like it. Why?
What we know really is what one Trump posted on Truth Social yesterday, calling Hawley, a Democrat-controlled pawn who was seeking to quote unquote sabotage him. And then we know what Hawley said today, to multiple reporters, which was that Trump had told him that Republican senators had called him yesterday, said there are last minute changes being made in committee that would essentially force you to sell your assets, including potentially Mar-a-Lago. Yeah. And then that Holly and the president discussed was because of the way the bill would work, you actually would not have to divest. But the fact remains, and I think this is why, Trump did get upset. I'm assuming even knowing what was in the bill was because those buy and sell requirements again, do still apply to him.
So what about public opinion? Where is the American people on this question, do you think?
I think it's a really popular idea. That was Warren's point, was that this is something that it seems like a lot of people want to do. It's something that we've seen brought up in every, or at least the last few Congresses, right? And in the House, we've seen a remarkable coalition of bipartisan lawmakers. It's Chip Roy, Seth Magaziner, a whole bunch of others who have all had these disparate proposals and are now huddling in hopes of reaching an agreement on a version that they would want to move it to the floor. I spoke with Congressman Magaziner earlier this week. He said he thinks that they are super, super close to that kind of consensus bill. Theirs will apply, it sounds like, specifically to Congress rather than the White House. And yeah, I think the wide breadth of support here is reflective of the fact that so many different pockets of constituents are really in favor of this kind of thing. I think the sentiment is, particularly if you say that you aren't doing this and this isn't a thing, then why not just take away the question, make it super, super, super clear that this is not something that's happening, and then we can feel good about moving forward.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. This is a long process. As you know, we'll see if it gains any traction or is DOA in the House if it passes the Senate. Eleanor, always good to see you.
Good to see you too.